It all started on a sunny Monday morning, the kind of peaceful morning where birds were chirping, sprinklers were going off across manicured lawns, and I was sipping coffee on my front porch, enjoying the calm before the workday rush. That's when I noticed something strange fluttering on my front gate, a bright orange paper, flapping in the breeze like a warning flag. I walked over, coffee mug in hand, and felt my stomach drop the moment I read the bold, aggressive print. Notice of violation. Remove unauthorized structure within 32 hours or face penalties including fines and legal action. What? I read it again and again. There was no mistake. The notice had my name, my address, and a timestamp. It claimed that my front gate, the small wooden one I had installed just 3 weeks ago, was in violation of neighborhood policy. I just stood there, stunned. I looked at the gate, trying to understand how this could possibly be considered a problem. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't metal. It wasn't electronic or motorized. Just a modest wooden gate, matching my existing fence with no lock or latch, the kind that swings gently in the breeze. I had put it up myself, after nearly losing my dog to a speeding delivery van the month before. It was more of a safety measure than anything else. But now, according to this notice, it was an unauthorized structure that had to be removed in 32 hours. I took a step back and stared at the gate. It looked exactly like 5 others on our block, almost identical, in fact. So why mine? Why now? Then I heard the sharp clack of heels on pavement. I turned and saw her. Karen, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her nose, lips pursed like she had just smelled something rotten, marching down the sidewalk like she owned the entire neighborhood. And although she wasn't technically part of the HOA board, everyone knew she ran the show behind the scenes. If she didn't like the color of your curtains, you'd probably get a compliance warning before the week was out. She slowed her stride when she saw me reading the notice. I could see the smug satisfaction on her face from 20 feet away. "You have 32 hours," she said, almost cheerfully. "Shouldn't have installed that without approval." I blinked. "It's just a gate. A basic one. It's not even—" She cut me off. "It's still a structure, and structures need approval. Section 14B of the HOA handbook." Then, without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, jotting something down on her clipboard like she was conducting a military inspection. I stood there, heart pounding. My coffee had gone cold. I wasn't even sure what to feel, angry, confused, humiliated. I looked back at the gate. Harmless. Quiet. Doing exactly what it was supposed to do, keeping my dog safe. But now, thanks to one woman's power trip, I was on a countdown. 32 hours. And not just a request, a threat. Remove the gate or face penalties. Legal action. Fines? Possibly worse. Something about the way Karen said it made me feel like this wasn't just about a gate. It felt personal. And that's when I decided this wasn't going to go down the way she thought it would. This time, Karen picked the wrong neighbor. Let me introduce you to Karen, or as she likes to imagine herself, the queen of the HOA. Now, before you jump to conclusions, let me clarify something. Karen wasn't actually on the HOA board. She wasn't elected, wasn't appointed, and technically didn't hold any official position of authority. But in her mind, oh, she was judge, jury, and executioner of all things community standards. If there was a blade of grass out of line or a mailbox painted the wrong shade of beige, you better believe Karen was already on the case. Every morning, rain or shine, she strutted through the neighborhood with her signature clipboard under one arm and a compact digital camera hanging from her neck like a badge of honor. Her walk wasn't casual. It was tactical. She didn't stroll. She patrolled. We called it Karen's Morning March. If your garbage can was visible from the street, expect a photo. Left your garden hose out for too long? Photo. A single weed peeking out between your driveway bricks? Oh, she had a macro lens for that. Her favorite phrase? "I'll be reporting this." She was a one-woman code enforcement unit. And the worst part? She enjoyed it. You could always tell when she was nearby. Conversation stopped. Curtains twitched. Neighbors ducked back inside. She had the power to ruin your morning with a single passive-aggressive sticky note or one of those infamous orange HOA courtesy violation tags, even though, again, she had no real authority to issue them. But she had mastered the art of intimidation. People just gave in to avoid the headache. I used to think it was kind of funny, even harmless. Some neighbors even joked about making Karen bingo cards. Wears a wide brim hat. White heavy check mark talks about property value. White heavy check mark says eyesore in every sense. White heavy check mark brags about reading the entire HOA handbook 3 times. White heavy check mark, but behind the jokes was a real problem. Karen was relentless. She treated our peaceful suburban block like it was her personal fiefdom. She didn't knock on doors to talk things out. She didn't greet you with a smile. She didn't ask questions. She cited you. She documented you. She submitted reports. And unfortunately, because she submitted so many and with such detail, the actual HOA board started to take her seriously. They didn't want to deal with her directly, so many of her complaints got quietly forwarded or acknowledged just to keep her quiet. That's how people like Karen thrive, not by earning respect, but by wearing people down. In her mind, she was preserving the beauty and value of our historic community. But to most of us, she was just a busybody with too much time and too little empathy. The irony? She lived in one of the oldest, most outdated homes on the block. Her grass was always patchy. Her shutters were faded, and she hadn't updated her roof shingles since the Bush administration. But of course she'd say, I'm grandfathered in. So when I saw her smirking at me after placing that 32-hour violation notice on my gate, acting like she had just won a major victory in a war only she was fighting, I knew this wasn't just a gate issue. It was a power play. Karen wasn't interested in fairness. She wanted obedience, control, submission. Well, not this time. This time, someone was going to push back later that same afternoon. I made what I now consider my first real mistake. I tried to reason with Karen. I know, rookie move. See, at that point, I was still under the illusion that this was just a misunderstanding. A neighborly conversation could clear things up. Maybe Karen had been misinformed. Maybe she thought the gate was something more than it really was. I mean, it's not like I installed a concrete wall or a steel fortress. It was just a basic wooden gate, about 4 feet tall, same color as my fence, same style as the homes on either side of me. No fancy hardware, no automated lock, just a swing gate to keep my dog safe from darting into the street. So I approached her politely. She was trimming her already perfectly square hedges, wearing her usual visor and gardening gloves, a picture of suburban self-righteousness. I took a deep breath and said in my calmest voice, Hi, Karen. I saw the notice you left about the gate. I just wanted to clear it up. It's not a permanent modification. I built it myself, and it doesn't block the sidewalk or affect anyone's property. She didn't even stop trimming. She just gave a little half smile, the kind that tells you immediately you're not going to be heard. Then she replied, Rules are rules. Section 14B clearly states, no modifications may be made to front-facing boundaries without prior HOA approval. You didn't get approval. I blinked. I read that section. It talks about major construction, like fences, driveways, or building extensions, not a simple gate. She finally turned to face me, eyes hidden behind her tinted glasses. You can debate it all you want, but you didn't follow protocol. The clock is ticking. Could you at least show me that clause in the handbook? I asked, still trying to keep things civil. She let out a loud sigh, tossed her clippers on the grass, and tilted her head. You'll see soon enough, she said with a smirk. Then she picked up her clipboard and walked back toward her house, her sandals clacking against the pavement like punctuation marks. I stood there for a minute, stunned, not by the notice, but by her attitude. Cold, dismissive, like I was an insect beneath her notice. I wasn't a neighbor to her. I was just another item on her violation checklist. That's when it hit me. Karen didn't want to talk. She didn't want to listen. She wanted compliance, obedience. She wanted people to jump when she barked. Still, I went back inside and pulled out the HOA handbook. Page after page of dense legalese. Sure enough, Section 14B was there, but it was vague. The wording referenced substantial changes to front-facing boundaries and anything that impacted public visual continuity. My gate? It was the opposite of substantial. And there were no hard definitions, just gray areas. Karen was exploiting that vagueness and counting on people like me not to challenge her. At that moment, I realized this wasn't just a neighbor trying to follow the rules. This was a person using rules as weapons. She didn't care about the gate. She cared about control. And unfortunately for her, I don't back down easily. The moment Karen disappeared behind her front door, I rushed back into my house and yanked open the drawer where I kept the dreaded HOA handbook. That dusty beige booklet hadn't seen daylight since I moved in 3 years ago. But today, it was my only weapon. I flipped to section 14B, the infamous clause Karen had quoted like it was the Ten Commandments. Sure enough, there it was, in vague, legal-sounding language. No substantial modifications shall be made to front-facing structures, barriers, or architectural boundaries without prior written approval of the homeowners association. But here's the thing. Nowhere in the handbook did it define what counted as substantial. No list of examples, no mention of gates. It talked about retaining walls, permanent fencing, stone pathways, and driveway extensions, things that involved contractors, permits, and weeks of construction. My little wooden gate? It was none of those things. But while the language might have been vague, Karen's warning was not. I had 32 hours to comply, and if I didn't, she made it sound like the wrath of the entire HOA would descend upon me. I wasn't taking any chances. I snapped photos of the gate from every angle, took close-ups of the hinges, the wood, and how it matched the existing fence. I even took a tape measure and documented its exact height and width. Then I compiled it all, photos, measurements, a copy of Section 14B, and sent it in an email to the official HOA board. Subject line, urgent clarification request on violation notice. A few hours later, I got a reply from their admin assistant. Thank you for reaching out. Your message has been forwarded to the Architectural Review Subcommittee. They will review your concern and respond within 5 to 7 business days. 5 to 7 business days. I didn't have 5 hours to spare. Karen had given me 32 total hours, and nearly 6 were already gone. I called the HOA office directly. A woman named Pam answered. Friendly enough at first. I explained the situation. I told her I believed Karen had filed a false report, that she was on the board, and that I needed someone, anyone, to step in before this got out of hand. Pam replied with the dreaded phrase, "We'll get back to you." Click. No promises, no reassurances, just corporate silence. And all the while, the clock kept ticking. By nightfall, I'd already burned through 14 hours. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak outside made me wonder if Karen was back with her camera, trying to gather more evidence. Paranoia crept in. I peeked through my blinds like I was in a spy thriller. Nothing. The next morning, I woke up early and walked around the neighborhood. That's when I noticed something wild. 3 other houses on my block had small gates almost identical to mine, same size, same height, even the same wooden style. One neighbor had hers up for nearly 6 months, and another had a front-facing archway with vines growing over it, definitely more modification than my gate. Not a single violation notice on any of them. It became clear this wasn't about enforcing a rule. This was about targeting me. And the more I thought about it, the more determined I became. I wasn't going to cave just because someone with a clipboard and an attitude thought she ran the show. I had 18 hours left, and I was going to spend every minute fighting back. By the time I was down to the final 6 hours on Karen's ticking clock, the anxiety had transformed into something else. Resolve. I had spent over a full day waiting on a response from the HOA. I had double-checked every word in the handbook, snapped more pictures than a real estate agent, and even mapped out every inconsistency in the neighborhood that had magically avoided Karen's radar. And now, staring at my humble little wooden gate, I made a decision. It stays. I wasn't tearing down something that was safer for my dog, matched my house perfectly, and, let's be honest, looked better than half the approved fences on the block, all because a self-appointed dictator had decided I was her new target. So I launched my own investigation. I walked the neighborhood again, camera in hand this time. But not to spy, to document. House number 7, they had a 6-foot-tall metal sculpture of a crane in the front yard. Literally a giant bird made of scrap metal, wings stretched, facing the street like a guardian of chaos. HOA violation? Nope. No orange sticker. No Karen confrontation. House number 12? They had solar panels mounted on their fence, not the roof, the fence, visible from the road. Technically a modification of a boundary structure under Section 14B. Still, nothing from Karen. Maybe she liked the environment. House number 3 had a pink flamingo army, not 2 or 3 for decoration. 27. I counted. No exaggeration. A flock of plastic flamingos that had spread like a lawn disease. Still, not a word. The hypocrisy was obvious. Karen's rules weren't based on logic, fairness, or community standards. They were based on personal feelings, and somehow I had landed squarely in her crosshairs. That afternoon, I typed up a full report. I attached every photo of every non-cited modification in the neighborhood, labeled by house number and time-stamped. I highlighted the ambiguous nature of Section 14B, attached photos of my own gate, and pointed out that there was no written notice from the actual HOA, only from Karen. I sent it to the HOA board again, this time CCing every board member listed on the contact sheet. Subject line, targeted enforcement, urgent response needed before escalation. And then, I waited. With just 4 hours left on the countdown, I watched Karen through my blinds as she marched past my house again, clipboard in hand, phone at the ready. She paused, stared at my gate, and smirked, like a predator thinking she had cornered her prey. Then she did something that made my blood boil. She took another photo. This time, I didn't hide behind the curtain. I opened the door and stepped outside. "Karen," I called. "You're wasting your time." She raised an eyebrow. "Not my time. Yours. You got until 5 p.m. I smiled. Calmly. "No, I don't. The gate stays. And you're not on the HOA board, remember?" For the first time, her smirk wavered. "You'll regret that," she hissed. "Trust me." But I didn't, because deep down I knew the truth. This wasn't about my gate. It never had been. It was about her control. Karen needed people to back down so she could feel powerful. But when someone pushed back, when someone exposed the double standards and hypocrisy behind her crusade, her entire act started to unravel. And this time, I was going to be the neighbor who said, "Enough is enough." I woke up to chaos. It wasn't the usual peaceful hum of sprinklers or birdsong that greeted me that morning. It was shouting, angry, commanding shouting coming from right outside my window. I shot out of bed, pulled aside the curtain, and my jaw dropped. Karen was back, but this time she wasn't alone. Flanking her were 2 large men in black polos, arms crossed, sunglasses on, earpieces tucked in their collars like they were on a secret mission. They weren't cops, that much was obvious, but they looked like private security. Neighborhood rent-a-UTs called, with egos bigger than their paychecks. And they were standing in my driveway. Karen's voice carried like a siren through the morning air. "We warned you," she shouted, pointing at my gate like it was a ticking bomb. "You've had your 32 hours, and now this structure is being forcibly removed." She turned to the guards. "Take it down." One of the men stepped forward and began inspecting the hinges of the gate, like he was about to start prying it off with his bare hands. That's when I snapped into action. I opened the door, phone in hand, already recording. "Don't touch that gate," I said, calm but loud. "It's on private property and you'll be trespassing." The guard froze, turning slightly toward Karen for instruction. She puffed up like a furious mall manager. "You're obstructing enforcement. This gate is in violation of oath policy, and I brought authorized agents to remove it." I stepped onto my porch, camera still rolling. "First off, you're not HOA board. Second, I've already contacted the real HOA president. Third, this gate isn't in violation, and I have it in writing." Now it was Karen's turn to hesitate. You could see it on her face. The flash of doubt, the realization that I wasn't just bluffing. But she was too deep into her performance to back down now. "Call the HOA president," she barked at one of the guards. I raised an eyebrow. "Already did. Yesterday. You'll be hearing from him any moment now." And just as I said it, almost like it was scripted, my phone buzzed. An incoming call. I held it up for her to see. Speak of the devil. It was Mr. Daly, the actual HOA president, returning my call. I answered on speaker. "Hey, Mr. Daly," I said calmly. "You might want to be aware that Karen just showed up at my house with 2 private security guards trying to dismantle my property. She's claiming HOA authorization." There was a long pause on the other end. "Then she what?" Karen took a step forward, face red with anger. "I'm enforcing the community guidelines." Mr. Daly didn't even try to hide his annoyance. "Karen, you have no authority to do that. And if those men touch a single thing on that property, they'll be personally liable. Do you understand?" She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. She glanced at the guards, who now looked visibly uncomfortable. One of them took a step back. The other shrugged. "Let's go," one of them muttered. "This isn't worth it." And just like that, they turned and walked off, leaving Karen alone on my driveway, fists clenched, seething. "You'll regret this," she muttered. But the thing was, she was the one who had just crossed the line. And what she didn't know was that the HOA president wasn't the only one I had contacted. Because now, with the footage from my security camera, the recorded audio from my phone, and a written statement from the HOA, I was ready to take this to the next level. Karen had escalated the war, and she had just walked into a battle she couldn't control. It was just after 10 a.m. when a gray Toyota Corolla pulled up in front of my house. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a man in his early 60s, button-down shirt wrinkled, tie half loosened, and a thick binder clutched under one arm. Mr. Daly, the actual president of our HOA. He looked like a man who'd been dragged into a mess he didn't sign up for. His eyes scanned my property, then landed on the gate, then on me. He let out a long sigh and walked up the path, muttering 17 calls this morning. 17. And 12 of them were about Karen. I almost laughed. That's not surprising. He didn't even bother with small talk. "Let's get this over with," he said, as we stepped into the shade of my porch. I already had my printed documents waiting. Photos, timestamps, footage stills, and even the pages of the HOA handbook I had highlighted and tabbed. Karen, of course, was across the street again, standing at the edge of her lawn, arms folded, lips tight, watching like a hawk with binoculars she didn't need. Mr. Daly adjusted his glasses and flipped through the materials. He nodded a few times, furrowed his brow at others, and paused at the close-up image I had taken of the gate next to the handbook clause. "This," he said, pointing at Section 14B, "was written 10 years ago to stop people from building concrete statues and putting koi ponds in their front yards. This gate doesn't even come close to violating this clause." I nodded. "That's what I've been saying since she slapped the orange notice on it." "She issued a notice?" he asked, surprised. I pulled it out of the folder. She did. Taped it right to my gate. Gave me 32 hours. Then tried to tear it down with 2 security guards this morning. He shook his head in disbelief. "She's not on the board. She's not a committee member. She doesn't have any enforcement authority. She certainly can't threaten removal or bring outside personnel to enforce anything. That's a serious overstep." At that moment, Karen, clearly trying to eavesdrop, walked across the street like she owned the pavement. "I hope you're here to back me up, Richard," she called. Mr. Daly turned slowly to face her, his expression unreadable. "Karen, do you have a minute?" She walked up, standing tall like she expected praise. I documented the violation. I gave him more than enough time to correct it. If the board isn't going to uphold the rules, then— "Karen," he interrupted, holding up a hand. "Let me stop you right there. You had no right to issue that notice, no right to threaten action, and certainly no right to escalate the situation the way you did this morning. You're not an HOA officer. You're a resident." Karen blinked, stunned. "But I filed dozens of complaints. I've done more enforcement work than anyone on the board." "That's exactly the problem," he said firmly. "You've been acting like a one-person task force. That ends now." She went pale, visibly pale. Her mouth opened, then closed. She took a shaky breath, looking around as if trying to find someone to back her up. No one came. "We'll be discussing this further in the next board meeting," Daly said sharply. "You're not to take enforcement into your own hands again, not with this property or any other. he turned back to me. As far as the HOA is concerned, your gate is perfectly acceptable. You followed every standard, and there's no violation here. I exhaled. Relief. Vindication. Karen? She just turned around and stormed back to her house, slower than usual. For once, her clipboard was tucked under her arm and not in use. Just when I thought the storm had passed, when the gate drama was behind me and Karen had finally been put in her place by the actual HOA president, the real thunder rolled in. It started with a knock at the door one Thursday morning. Not a friendly neighbor. Not a package delivery. A man in a gray suit and a stiff posture handed me a large white envelope. "You've been served," he said without emotion, then walked away before I could even react. I opened the envelope and froze. It was a legal notice, a civil complaint filed in small claims court by none other than Karen. But this wasn't from the HOA. No, this was personal. She had hired a lawyer, or at least someone pretending to be one, and was suing me for defamation, emotional distress, and my personal favorite, obstruction of community standards. I read those words out loud 3 times, laughing in disbelief. According to the document, Karen was accusing me of publicly undermining her community leadership, recording her without permission, and creating a hostile living environment through passive-aggressive conduct. Passive-aggressive? The woman brought hired muscle to rip down a gate like it was a DEA raid. It would have been funny if it weren't so serious. So I did what any smart person would do. I didn't panic. I called a friend of mine from college, now a practicing attorney, and asked for advice. I sent him everything. The videos, the audio recordings, the orange violation notice, the handbook with highlighted sections, and even the screenshots of Karen's messages in the neighborhood group chat where she bragged about cleaning up the block one house at a time. Within 24 hours, my friend called me back. "Let's just say," he began, "Karen made a big mistake picking this fight with you." I was intrigued. "Why?" I asked. "Because she has a history, and it's not a good one." Turns out, this wasn't Karen's first attempt at a legal ambush. She had filed 3 previous small claims suits in the last 2 years against her neighbors, all for similar reasons: defamation, emotional trauma, community obstruction. One was for someone who refused to trim their rose bushes. Another was for a neighbor who installed a flagpole she didn't like. Each case had been dismissed. In fact, one judge had even written in the ruling that Karen's actions bordered on vexatious litigation, which is legal speak for using the courts to harass people. My friend explained that with her pattern of behavior and the amount of evidence I had, we not only had a rock-solid defense, we had grounds for a counterclaim. That's when everything changed. We drafted our response, polite but firm, stating that I denied all her claims and would be filing a counter-lawsuit for harassment, trespassing, and malicious prosecution. We included all the footage, HOA statements, and a signed letter from Mr. Daly confirming that Karen had acted without authorization. We also added a formal warning if she did not drop the case, we pursued damages. 1 week later, I received another envelope. This time, it wasn't hand-delivered. It came through regular mail. Inside was a 1-page letter from her lawyer stating that, after further consideration, Karen was withdrawing her claim. No apology. No explanation, but it was over, at least legally. And while I felt relieved, I also realized something important. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was someone who weaponized rules, authority, and even the legal system to control people. But this time, she picked the wrong person, and for the first time in years, she was being held accountable. When Karen dropped her lawsuit, I thought that was the end of it. But then, like most buried things, the truth started to rise. See, when I had worked with my lawyer to prepare the counterclaim, we didn't just stop at my situation. We started looking deeper into her pattern of behavior, her previous claims, and her interactions with other neighbors. And what we found wasn't just disturbing. It was systemic. Karen had filed over 30 formal complaints in the past 12 months alone. 30. That's more than 2 per month. And here's the kicker, not a single one of those complaints had been voted on by the HOA board. None of them had gone through official channels. She had used the HOA's name, logos, and language, but all of it came from her own email account, using a signature that read, Karen Myers, Head of Residential Integrity, HOA Watch Committee. That title? Completely fake. There is no watch committee, no head of residential integrity. In fact, several current board members confirmed they'd never heard of such a position and certainly never authorized anyone to act on behalf of the HOA without board oversight. But the most troubling part? We mapped out the locations and identities of the residents she had targeted, and a very ugly pattern emerged. The overwhelming majority of her complaints were filed against newer residents, renters, and families of color. Families who didn't grow up in the area. People who moved in recently, trying to settle down quietly. Several of them had already moved out, citing constant pressure, harassment, and not feeling welcome. Karen wasn't just being a control freak. She was abusing her power, unofficial as it may have been, to create a hostile environment. She used HOA rules like weapons, filing complaints with intimidating language and vague threats. She made people feel small. And worst of all, she had gotten away with it for years. But not anymore. With everything we uncovered, emails, complaint copies, fake titles, and a pattern of targeted enforcement, I sent an official complaint to the HOA board. This time, not just to Mr. Daly, but to every board member, including the HOA's legal consultant. I included my full counterclaim, video evidence, timestamps of her trespassing on my property, and a statement from my lawyer. The board's reaction was swift. Within 2 weeks, an emergency session was called. Multiple neighbors submitted statements. Some came forward with their own stories of being targeted by Karen. Others shared how they had been too scared or tired to push back. One couple had received 6 citations in 2 months for minor issues like garage door paint and bird feeder placement. It was clear Karen had been running her own dictatorship, completely outside the system, and no one had stopped her because they didn't want to get involved. But now, someone had. The board launched a formal investigation. Karen was issued a cease and desist order. She was temporarily suspended from all HOA-related activities, including access to board meetings, group emails, and neighborhood enforcement privileges. They even issued a neighborhood-wide bulletin clarifying that no resident had the authority to issue citations, notices, or legal threats on behalf of the HOA without board approval. For the first time, the community saw her for what she really was, a bully with a clipboard. And although Karen didn't say a word publicly, her silence spoke volumes. The woman who once marched the sidewalks like a sheriff now avoided eye contact. Her daily patrols? Gone. And while the board's investigation was still ongoing, the message was clear. Her reign of fear was over. 3 weeks after the investigation began, a notice went out to every mailbox in the neighborhood. Special HOA meeting, all residents encouraged to attend. Topics include resident complaints, code enforcement clarifications, and HOA procedure review. It didn't say Karen's name, but everyone knew. That evening, the community center was more packed than I'd ever seen it. Folding chairs lined the walls. People stood in the back. There were folks I hadn't seen in months, elderly couples, young parents with strollers, even the guy from 3 streets over who never talks to anyone. Word had spread like wildfire. Karen's reign had finally caught up with her. Mr. Daly walked to the podium, shoulders heavy but posture straight. He cleared his throat and looked over the sea of expectant faces. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "I wish the circumstances were better, but transparency is important, so tonight we're going to lay everything on the table." He opened a thick folder labeled Internal Review Findings. For the next 10 minutes, he went over the facts, the 30-plus complaints Karen had filed without approval, the fake titles she had used in emails, the photos she'd taken without consent, and the targeting pattern that made many neighbors feel unwelcome, even unsafe. Each point was met with quiet murmurs from the crowd. Heads shaking, people whispering, "I knew it, and she did the same to us." Then came the testimonies. One elderly woman stood up and said Karen had tried to report her for not repainting her shutters fast enough while she was recovering from surgery. A young couple with a toddler explained how Karen made them feel like outsiders from the day they moved in. Another man said he had gotten 6 warnings in 1 year for things like wind chimes and solar path lights. Karen sat near the back. No clipboard, no smug grin. Just a stony expression and tightly folded arms. She looked small. When the testimonies ended, Mr. Daly read the board's decision. Effective immediately, Karen Myers is permanently prohibited from filing individual code enforcement complaints, issuing warnings, or representing herself as a member of any HOA committee or authority body. All prior complaints from Ms. Myers are officially nullified unless verified and reinvestigated by board officials. A wave of relief moved through the room like a breeze. People clapped. A few even cheered. Then Mr. Daly turned toward me and added, "Additionally, in regard to the legal situation between Ms. Myers and resident Mr. Thompson, we received confirmation that Ms. Myers has withdrawn her lawsuit. Mr. Thompson's counterclaim has been settled privately. Legal fees will be reimbursed, and a formal written apology has been issued." I stood up just enough to give a small nod. I didn't need applause. I just needed the nightmare to be over. But I wasn't done making my point. 2 days later, I gave my gate a fresh coat of paint, bright red, not out of pettiness, but as a symbol, a reminder that standing up for yourself matters. That silence gives people like Karen power. That communities only thrive when no one is allowed to bully others behind a mask of fake authority. To this day, the gate still stands, stronger than ever. Karen, she's still in the neighborhood. Quieter now. No more morning patrols, no more photos. People still nod politely to her, but no one forgets, and neither do I. Because this wasn't just about a gate. It was about drawing the line, literally and figuratively, and letting everyone know some battles are worth fighting,